So we pulled together quite the team here from around the world. We've got Jelle here from Rotterdam. We've got Nicole here from Barrier, BC, and Scott's come all the way from Surrey. So good job, Scott. So I'm going to let each of the individuals here introduce themselves and maybe tell a little bit about themselves in terms of what they do and where they've come from. So Jelle, why don't we start with you, and by all means, green button there. Fast forward through your slides.
Thanks for the introduction, Craig. So I've ran an architectural practice in Paris for quite a while, called Eastern Architecture and Design Research. From there, I engaged in PhD research in TU Delft as an early co-founder for robotics. Was a technological startup from my research in TU Delft. And in 2017, I became a CTO at Actual, where we're focused more on fit-out products that are robotically fabricated. And last year, I started a third startup, Terrestrial, where we focus on earthen construction. Yeah, I hand it over to you, Nicole.
Thank you so much. So I am presently the head of operations at Paradigm Panels in Barrier, BC. And just to give you a little bit of my background, that's not on the screen. I have had 10 years in manufacturing experience, 10 years in the construction industry, and by trade I am a lawyer, so I kind of dabbled in a little bit of construction law in Vancouver for a little bit before I had to jump ship and go straight into construction. As head of operations, I am in charge of coordinating and executing the production in the factory, all of the logistics, quality, all the way through to troubleshooting the robots and all the automotive technological components within the factory. So, yep. So here you can kind of see what we're doing in the factory, and I added a few little of the technological components that we do use in the automation we use. We use robots that come from Sweden, KUKA robots with Randax software. We have an X-Flock machine that comes from Germany, which is a pneumatic insulation injection machine. And of course, we use some high-end software to prefabricate our panels with the automated machines.
That's great. And maybe we'll just pass the clicker over there to Scott.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Scott Comfort. I am the president of Seagate Mass Timber. I started this whole journey very far away from what I do right now, working in construction, and very similar to some other people in the room, I'm sure. I grew up working as a laborer, then worked my way through the trades, became a Red Seal carpenter, and then found my way into construction management and ended up working for some larger GCs. It's very recently that I've shifted over into mass timber, and I will tell you it's been a very fast learning experience. I've been drinking out of a fire hose, but getting to come in with a different perspective and see from the prefabrication to the site what all of this looks like has been very entertaining. Seagate has grown along with the industry, and right now we're executing projects all over North America, and on every single one we're learning something new. I was really excited to be invited here today simply because of what we think the future holds. We think that there is only so much you can do on the site to improve efficiency. You can only work things so fast. You can only have so many people crammed into a tight area. We really think that efficiency is going to come from the other end of the spectrum here through advancing the prefabrication and manufacturing and designing in a way that we can assemble things fast and efficiently on site. And as a couple other people have already said, create less of an impact in the field.
That's great, Scott. And we'll get into some of the questions here as well for this panel. But there's as we bring people from around the world here, I mean, we'll maybe talk about some of the philosophical differences between what's going on here as well as here in North America versus what's going on in Europe. And maybe, spend some time talking about how you bring your products to market, in terms of that sort of evolution. And Jelle, why don't I just start with you, and maybe I know you've got a few slides there you can share with the audience too, because you're really at the front end. I like to think of this group here as almost like a mini supply chain in some ways. I mean, Jelle, we're talking about really introduction of some of this new technology, and you're at the forefront of it. So yeah, I'd like to see what you have.
Sure. Thanks, Greg. So the technology that I developed through my PhD in the startup Audico is really revolving around mold making, right? So it allows for more interesting shapes to be manufactured at quite a challenging price point, right? There's 5 to 10x gains to be made. So also working intensively with Zaha architects and especially Seagate. So one project where we delivered a lot of molds was the Opus Dubai Hotel, for which we provided the formwork for the interior facade. So it's quite exciting as a new startup company to be involved in such high-end projects. And the reason for that is not really sympathy, although I'd like to think so. We're able to deliver on just also 5 to 10x faster, right? So the economic advantages directly translate into time advantages. So it's in that sense, there's risk in working with a young tech startup. On the other hand, we're also finding ourselves on the side of de-risking the projects in terms of time schedule and avoiding costly penalties to be incurred. So the technology of wire cutting was influential, and working closely in tandem with Seagate and Zaha, especially on the Winton Math Gallery in London, has been a highlight. So, for instance, actually Seagate spoke of these mentions before. Were introduced with the constraints of the methodology in mind, and the fabrication methodology in mind, and that's rare in a sense to have this close integration between architecture and specialized fabricators. So that's super exciting. But conversely, I was also somewhat frustrated that the methodology has been fairly impactful. The business has been really quite successful. We made an IPO in 2018, but we find ourselves ending up as a subcontractor, right? And so in 2017, I joined Actual as CTO, where we're using 3D print technology to produce fit-out products, right? So we're producer and consumer of our own technology. So for instance, this is a floor that we printed for Schiphol. So this was a prototype, but none of our floors have seen that kind of action since. So that has been interesting. But that has been really satisfying, right? Is that to develop an open-ended product that also other designers can engage with, right? So sometimes designers keep things a little bit too close to heart, I feel. So last summer, the Alice Spot by Zaha and Techno was presented at the Venice Biennale, where the floor that we produced allowed for a kind of continuity across the exterior and the interior. So it's exciting that that we were able to develop really these kind of architectural products with a team that is so close to the heart. What's cool with Fit Out is that it allowed us to really explore a new business model. I mean, the business model of architecture so deeply broken is that any change is a considerable improvement. A project that I'm quite proud of are these weave wall panels that we built for Nike. So what's interesting with fit out is that from first concept drawings to installation, and this is in the Oxford Street, right? This is the pulsating heart of London. That took six weeks, right, from start to finish. So that's exciting. The robots that I've developed, they're printing through the night, through the weekends. So Monday morning over coffee, yeah, it's the exciting moment of the weekend, right? You get to see the produce of the print farm, and yeah, that's fascinating.
That's great. And Nicole, from your standpoint, your supply chain and how do you bring your products to market? I mean, what's the technology on your end?
Well, Paradigm Panels is really just 2 years young. So we are as well a startup company in our own right. And the technology, of course, that we have brought to market, the bread and butter, of course, has to do with the robots. But of course, there's the back end here, the software that we utilized. And that's really just to ensure that we have accurate cuts, the precise fabrication. Without utilizing this software, the automation aspect of it wouldn't be achievable. And an interesting story behind that is the robots, and of course the beginning of Paradigm Panels occurred as well during the pandemic. And so we received the robots, but we couldn't have anybody come to install them. So we had to install and figure it all out on our own, which was very, very challenging. But in the end, when you look back on it and when we reflect on this, this is the best thing that could have happened to us because we're able to really troubleshoot the robots. We understand them from a deeper connection than if we did have a team coming from Sweden to install and provide support. Now we're at a level of where we are able to troubleshoot everything on our own, and we actually don't have to rely on that support from Sweden. So it's really brought us to the next level of understanding automation from the ground up and being able to achieve what we're looking to achieve in the timelines, rather than, let's say, if we had an issue, we would now have to rely on, of course, the time difference between Canada and Sweden and having to troubleshoot that there. And now we can just do it in-house, which just speeds things up quite a bit.
Yeah, that's great. And Scott, on your end, you sit in an interesting chair. I mean, being on the install side of things, what do you rely on your supply chain, and how are you bringing your products to market, on the install side?
So as you said, we kind of sit on the far end of that supply chain, but there's a couple things that really impact us. The first is we rely on people like Jelle and Nicole here to get us these products so that we can install them on site. Technology's supplied a huge amount of visibility to that. In the past, we just had to rely on people's words. Now we can track almost minute by minute where a product is in shipping, when it leaves the factory, when it arrives in a port, where it is in the ocean, and when it's arriving on a truck in Canada somewhere. So that's one piece that really helps us keep our clients in the loop as well. Another part is obviously the accuracy that comes with some of the prefabrication and digital systems that are out there. Allows us to have products delivered to us that are so accurate and fit together so well that it allows for the best possible efficiency on site. And then finally, I think tracking at our end from a quality standpoint, the use of technology and just closing out that supply chain, making sure the products that we get are exactly what was intended from the manufacturer when it arrives for us.
Yeah, that's great. And, I think this is where we start moving into more the practical, side of the equation in terms of how we use prefabrication. I mean, Scott, maybe I'll start with you as well. What about the process, like recommendations for people on, how they get started with prefabrication? And what do you find is, where's the good jumping in point on the prefab side of things? I mean, we just heard from Joe, putting a project together. I mean, you're an installer as well, and, maybe give the audience here some practical tips.
Yeah, I mean, Joe definitely had it right with saying early involvement is key. I would say one of the best things that design teams can do or ownership teams can do, developers, is set an intent. If you're looking to get into prefabrication, there's so many reasons to get into it, but everybody has an intent behind it, whether it's efficiency and cost savings, or you're trying to save the world one project at a time, or it's a system that you really want to get involved in because you see it being repeatable in your business. Set that intent early on and figure out what it is you need, and then pick your systems accordingly. Figure out exactly what points you want that system to hit, what your technology should be doing for you, and how that's going to apply to whatever prefabricated system you're looking at. It really applies with anything from highly technical stuff right down to mass timber on a day-to-day basis. I think getting into it, other than that, is really, there are so many experts out there in the field, and most of the experts out there really love sharing their knowledge. Again, I relate back to mass timber quite a bit. We all love talking about it. We all love sharing what we've learned because it's exciting for us. So don't hesitate to pick up the phone, call those people in the industry, call some of the people in the room and ask if you can speak with some of the speakers that have been here today, because most of them will gladly sit down with you and share some insight before you get going on something.
Yeah, and that's a very good point as well. I mean, I like to think here in Vancouver, we're in a little bit of a bubble here in that we have such a strong knowledge base here in this city and even in this province. And, with the growth of prefabrication that we're seeing out there, there's a lot of startups that don't have much in the way of planning. I'll be honest, I've seen a lot. And, Scott's right. Talk to the people who have actually done it if you're looking at, engaging with prefabrication. Jelle, maybe jump on that as well, from your standpoint, what you're seeing. Well,
maybe my view is somewhat differing, but slightly complementary, is that we really focus a lot on software development here, right? Is that so? Due to the anthropomorphisms of robots, is that people get a little bit hung up on process or the hardware of things, but it's really where in the software development where the larger investments are made and the dependencies are forged. So at Audico we really made, since it's such a novel way of producing, so a novel way of and incredibly fast, right? So the wire cutting process is like 10x faster than a milling process. So you need to program your machines also 10x faster, otherwise you're not reaping the benefits, right? If you're milling a marble sculpture, take your time milling that, programming it. It's going to mill for weeks. But if it's if large parts are made in minutes, not hours, you're going to spend a lot of time, a lot of resource on software development. And I think in a sense the frameworks that have become available, I've contributed a CAD kernel, for instance, called Python OCC, that is also now becoming part of the Compass project of the Block Research Group that Shajay addressed by Tom van Nelen and Philip Block. I mean, the most talented researchers in Europe are making these incredibly competent tool sets available, right? So, 10 years ago you needed maybe 20, 30 software developers, and I think a team or 5 or 6 software developers. Things are going incredibly fast, right? So it's really terraforming, right? You have these tectonic layers on technology that are being added, and it also means that you can deliver software products faster, more agile. So I think that's key to have a software strategy and looking beyond the hardware there. Yeah,
that's great. And Nicole, from your standpoint, Paradigm, what are you seeing in terms of the type of clients that you have, and where do you see your clients jumping in, or from what? how that makes your business tick.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So where I think clients need to jump in would be very early on, design phase, of course. We always like to say, give as much time as you can for design because it takes the longest in panelization, a lot longer than people often expect. And also know kind of what you're looking for, at the same time keep an open mind to make changes, to have some sort of like a tolerance, or know what you want for your critical components in your build, and then be able to work with everything else and be a little bit moldable with it, because panelization is definitely quite different than stick framing. And also it depends on what type of build you want. So at Paradigm we do a regular stick panelization, so your 2x6 walls open, as well as we do passive house standard design. So a lot of people do come into the company and they think that they're just looking at a regular build, open wall panels, and they come in and they get the excitement of the passive house standard, and we sell them on the passive house standard. At the same time, it's best to know what your timeline is, and if you have any give on that. Because for passive house standard, of course, and this kind of will flow into the supply chain discussion, but there's the windows. That's really a huge component to passive house standard, and there's a long lead time, and we have a very short supply on suppliers in North America. So often Paradigm, we import from Austria and from Europe, and so there is a long lead time in that, as well as other products that we use and materials that we use. So just knowing what your timeline is and kind of what we can, those parameters that we can work within, and then also being able to compromise in other situations. So.
Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head. I mean, right now we're, prefabrication, especially here in North America, is still in its infancy, really. And, as we've just gone through in the last couple of years here with, COVID, supply chain issues for pretty well every company that is involved in construction. And I think you're right, as we sort of develop that prefabrication and starting to look at, more players coming into the market, and that will hopefully alleviate some of the issues that we're facing. But and maybe this is good if we're kind of segueing into what makes a good project and what doesn't. And Jelle, maybe I'll start with you here on this. Is where have projects gone awry, and what are the lessons you've learned from them? And I'll ask the other panelists the same question too.
Yeah, you're gonna hate my answer because these things can be far more ambivalent, right? So for instance, this a couple of years ago, I did this stone cutting process. So my friend Wes McGee, he was mounting new tools on a robot every couple of weeks, and me being the software geek, I wanted to recuperate a reputation and do a kind of brutal instrument. And this fascination that I have for natural stone processing also wove into that. So in a sense, this was just a kind of fairly loose experiment that we ran in Carrara, really in a matter of a couple of weeks. I think it from ID to development, it took about 6 weeks. So technically it was quite successful. Business-wise, it was a drama. Sort of somebody unsolicited continued development. But I mean, it gets even more ambivalent, right? Because is that so dire? Not necessarily, right? So now when you go up these Carrara cores, you see, a bunch of these massive robots continuing this kind of exercise that we did for a couple of, it's deeply satisfying, right? I was totally ripped off, but it's also, right, is that these things are not so black and white, right? Another point is that I kind of failure that triggered also a lot was we tendered for this project. So with wire cutting you can cut a cylinder but not a sphere, right? It's single curved, it's not double curved, and we couldn't be as aggressive because we didn't have the capability of double curved cutting yet. On the other hand, not landing the tender also saved the company probably, right? So, but then on the other hand, it also did trigger this intuition that by bending a blade rather than cutting with a straight wire, we would be able to approximate these double curve formworks, right? So frustration-driven development, right? I would call that. So I think that's been an important technological development. So these things are fairly nuanced, is my perspective.
That's great. And yeah, Nicole?
Yeah, so on the screen, as you can see, I kind of put up some digital fails that we've had. So of course I'll start with the failure of what has happened and just kind of real world situations. So when a project hasn't gone well, typically it has to do with timeline. And everybody wants their project on time, and that's completely understandable. But when we're working with technology and automation and of course robots, as you can see here on the left-hand side, we had the factory settled by 2 millimeters, and that 2 millimeter settlement threw the robots off, and the one robot so we have a robot sitting on the left side and one on the right side, and it just happened to settle on the side where, as you can see, there's a nail vector that's kind of going right down the middle of the panel there. And that took quite a bit, again, because we're troubleshooting everything in-house. That took a lot of time to try to figure out what actually occurred and why did it happen, and then having to retrain the robots to get them back on board. And in the middle there, very similar thing occurred. However, we also have instances where it just has to do with design. So there is a high standard that we live up to take everything from design and be able to put it into the machines and have it interpret it correctly and have it output here. So as you can see, every single nail, and I think it's a 2-inch spacing on a shear wall here, so huge pain. At nail miss all the way down the line. And then on the right, this is something that just recently occurred. This picture on the right here was just taken last week. And we just changed out, in our automated framing station, we changed out a nail gun, and it's very slight here, but the nails aren't driven all the way in, and that doesn't seem like too big of an issue. You're like, hey, just hammer them in on the end of the line, but it also goes into an automated squaring table, and this really prevents it from becoming square. So now it's sheeted and it's not square, so it's a lot of work to take off. So those are kind of some of the things that occur that really prevent us from getting the projects to the customer on the timeline that they're expecting. They're not, it looks like small issues here, but they're not small issues at all. At the same time, once we fix those issues and we overcome that step and that hurdle, we know exactly what to do in the next situation to either prevent it or be able to fix it going forward. But again, some of the successes that we've had really are essentially getting everything on time, having no chargebacks, and having satisfied customers who are repeat customers again and again and want to continue on with us, whether they're doing a regular stick frame 2x6 wall or whether they're going to move on and now they want to get into the passive house standard.
Yeah, that's great. And Scott, I mean, you've probably got some good stories from your end on the install side of things, so maybe share some lessons learned for the audience here as well.
I didn't bring any pictures just to protect the innocent. I would say for us, what we see more often than not is we see these amazing systems designed for use in the field. What it really boils down to is user input. I think just about every system that's designed out there needs people contributing to it in the field. I think even in the processing plant, they need the right information, the right specifications being put into the program in order to turn out the right product. And what often happens is people invest early in this very expensive technology for their company, and they roll it out in one day to their team, and it ends up out in the field, and nobody uses it, or they use it, to 10% of its capacity. And it's really disappointing because we've seen it done right, and when it's done right, it's amazing what some of these programs can do. And when it's done wrong, it's amazing how detrimental it can be to the project overall. From a positive standpoint, we found a lot of our benefit as a company is the I guess the collaboration of all of the experience within the organization. And when we have remote projects or projects that are in other parts of North America, that becomes harder and harder to utilize because you have projects that you can't just drive to or see on a weekly basis, even because they're halfway across North America. One of the things that has come out recently is we worked with a company in the US that is actually programming drones to do a standardized movement path around a building, to video the exact same timeline and areas of the building as it moves around it each day, which gives us a really clear insight into what the teams have done during the day, what the product is looking like, and it allows our entire team, wherever they are in the world, to start looking at what are some of the challenges, what was done right, what was done wrong, what's taking longer than it might take. It really boils down to that communication piece, and technology is allowing us to do that in a way that it's very visual for our people.
Yeah, that's an amazing use of new technology, especially as we start working remote and what we've learned from COVID here as well. So I know we're up against time here, and there's probably an opportunity here for a question or two, and I'll maybe ask the audience here if there's a question for this panel here. And if not, I know Helen's looking at me saying we're probably up against time anyway. So anyways, I'd like to say thank you very much to our audience here, our panelists here, and ask the audience to give a warm round of applause. So thanks.